Okay, so Christy, please, please let us know if you need anything as you're going. But Christy, welcome, and thank you so much for sharing with us about adoption.
Thank you for having me. Hi everybody, my name is Kristy Parton. I am currently the Swain County Department of Social Services attorney. I have been practicing for around 12 years now. I have been parent counsel, and I also do a lot of private family law cases. So I have had adoptions across the board. I've done adoptions for parents adopting out of foster care. I have done the pre-work for foster parents adopting, where I'm on the DSS side. And I have done everything from TPR through the adoption in private cases. Joanne and Joe and Gail wanted me to kind of talk about my personal experiences with adoption first, because I actually have a lot of personal experience with adoption. My family is very big on adoption. And we'll start by, I guess, telling you about my 16-year-old little brother. While I was in law school, my parents were asked to take care of a cousin, a 2-year-old little cousin. Let's see, I will show you a picture of what he looked like when we first got him. This is my baby brother, John. John would have been in foster care. He was living down in the Thomasville area. He was going to go into foster care. His parents were both on drugs. The situation was not good. When we actually got him, he was almost 2. He was nonverbal. He couldn't form words. He didn't know any language, had no language skills, and he was malnourished. He had the lovely little malnourished pot belly. For a while after we got him, one of our big problems was that when he ate, he would hide food, and he was also bad to dig food out of the garbage. So 2 years of hard work later, he was able to talk. He was able to, he no longer had the food fears. For most of his life, he's had other fears. We've seen separation anxiety, worries, especially about my parents, and things like that. But for the most part, he's been doing really, really well. And I had this set up in a way that I could pull up a picture, but apparently I've got to pull it up separately. I don't like that. So here he is. If it will pull it up. Here he is now. He's very smart, and he's very smart-alecky, and he is one of my favorite people on the planet. But that's just a brief story about how I, as a 44-year-old, have a 16-year-old baby brother. He did not end up in foster care. He was a voluntary placement by the parents with my parents. They had to terminate the parents' rights, and then they were able to adopt him. And they actually adopted him while I was taking the bar exam in law school. In addition to my baby brother, John, I have, let's see. Sorry, let me stop that. In addition to my baby brother, John, I have 2 nieces and a nephew. I helped my sister adopt my niece, Athena, who is also a family member placement. She is now 17. And just this year, they completed their first foster care adoption of a non-related child. So my niece Adea joined us. She physically joined us last year, but she was legally adopted in August of this year. I also have done a step-parent adoption for my brother Keith. So my nephew Dallas is via step-parent adoption. I've also helped one of my cousins adopt his grandchildren out of foster care. So as you can see, just personally, I have been involved with everything. And so adoption is very, very near and dear to my family's hearts. So one of the things, so when it comes to actual adoption, the biggest thing for everybody to know is that once you get to the part where you're doing the adoption, and that's the hardest part to get to, But once you get to the point where you are doing the adoption, it's pretty much paperwork. It's almost all paperwork. In fact, you may never have to go into court. So for the most part, it's going to start where adoption is going to start for the foster families is with DSS. And with DSS, it's going to start either the Department of Social Services is going to have to terminate the parents' rights. I just finished doing that on a couple of cases, and we're working through the adoption process on a couple of those cases right now. And I've got a couple of terminations I'm getting ready to get to file. Hooray. Or sometimes the parents will relinquish their rights. I'm very happy to report that I've got a couple of cases going through our system in my DSS right now where the parents did relinquish their rights. So those are the two ways, because that's the first step to get to the adoption is the parents' rights have to be terminated or they have to relinquish their rights. I'm not going to get into a lot of that because Joanne and Joe and I discussed this the other day, and I think that at some point in time they'll do a separate session probably on termination, because that's a whole big monster in and of itself. But once the termination is done, if you are going through foster care, you are probably going to be eligible for some adoption assistance funds through a Department of Social Services. What I've encountered is that the Department of Social Services will make recommendations to foster parents about attorneys that they know will do the foster parent adoptions for those adoption fees. And they leave it to you to contact the attorney and get that set up. And then most of the paperwork at that point is going to be handled between the Department of Social Services and the attorney. If you're doing a private adoption, then it's going to be, you're going to hire your own attorney. That's typically for just an adoption, that's probably going to run you. I do mine for a flat rate where consents and terminations have already been done and all I'm doing is the adoption. I do that typically for a flat rate of about $1,200. I'm also in the poorest district in the state. So those of you who are in much wealthier districts, much wealthier regions, as they call them, you're going to find that your attorneys are probably not going to be quite as cost efficient. But a straightforward adoption, once termination's been done and once or consents have been done, probably going to run you between $1,200, $1,500 to $3,000. I really don't know what the price scale is down there in the wealthier districts. I know that in this district, if you price it three grand, you're really pricing yourself out of most of our market. So that's kind of getting you there. So what I wanted to talk about then, as I said, adoption in North Carolina is mostly about the paperwork. So you're going to start, I'm going to just kind of show you some of the documents because some of these you will personally have to help out with. A lot of the paperwork, the Department of Social Services will handle what they can, but some of these you will have to help out with the paperwork. So you're going to start with an adoption petition. That's the big one. Let me find, I'm sorry, I'm still covering up my own screen here and getting in my own way. So you start with the adoption petition. And now you'll see that this actually says not step parent. They do have a separate set, almost completely identical paperwork, but a separate set of petition and decree of adoption for a step parent adoption. They're a little weird about that. If you do not fill out the right one, they will send your adoption back. So if you are ever looking at a private adoption and you want to do a step parent adoption, you have to get the specific step parent documents. So these are pretty straightforward. You're gonna, you'll fill in the county, you'll fill in your names, your full names, and then the adoption of the child, and that's going to be whatever name you want them to go by once they're adopted. So, and as I said, most of this you will end up helping out with, but it gets into some personal some very personal information, especially once you get toward the end of the adoption. This one's not so bad. You're going to talk the name of the parent, your gender, your address, the name by which the adoptee is to be known, whether you've got meet these standards, which are these are the statutory standards, whether they've been in North Carolina for at least 6 months preceding the filing of the adoption, or. So, and I've given copies of this paperwork to Mr. Allen, so I'm not going to go through it all specifically. I just kind of want to throw it up there. And then if you have questions at the end, you can ask and we'll come back to it. But so you're going to have to meet the statutory elements, which are going to be right here. This is jurisdiction, whether or not you have the right in North Carolina to ask for this adoption, which means that typically you have to have lived here for 6 months and the child has had to live here for 6 months. But you do see that there are the exceptions. Petitioning to adopt a child currently in the legal custody of a North Carolina licensed adoption agency or county DSS, or this is typically, I think, and you have some that are for when a child is a newborn. Pre-placement assessments are a part of this that I will cover in just a moment. Here's the part with the necessary consents, relinquishments, or terminations of parental rights that have to be done. Here is something where you can, if you don't have those. So basically, you're going to help fill out the petition, and you have to fill it out and sign it and have it notarized. And that's going to be something that the foster parents themselves will help with. Normally, now in a foster parent adoption, the Affidavit of Parentage is another one. That's one that the Department of Social Services is going to fill out, unless they might ask you if this is has been a kinship placement. You might be the one filling in this information because you might have more of the knowledge than the Department of Social Services has about whether or not these people are actually the parents of this child. So as you can see, this is a document that is simply about you are saying that the parents or the prior adoptive parents are the parents that are the legal parents of that child and birth parents. If a child is over the age of 12, they have to actually do their own consent to allow for the adoption. So normally, again, in foster parent adoption, the Department of Social Services, before they even go to a termination of parental rights, that's part of the termination of parental rights questioning we have is this child ready to be adopted? Is this child adoptable? And part of that question is if they are over the age of 12, does this child want to be adopted? And does this child want to be adopted by the person you're proposing adopt them, if you have that? So we generally, this is actually usually a fun day in my office when I have a child come in to do their own, because they enjoy being part of the process, I have found. My niece came in and did this for her own adoption. My other niece went into DSS and did it for hers. I've had any number of kids come in who are over the age of 12. And it's actually a really fun day because they're so excited and they really do enjoy being part of the process. And this might be the only time they get the chance to be part of the process because, as I said, most of adoptions are just pure paperwork. So the child is going to fill this out. They do also get the 7 calendar days to revoke. Parents who do relinquishments or consents to adopt have 7 calendar days to revoke that in writing. The child can also revoke that. I've never had that happen with a child. I have had it happen with a parent who is my client, but I've never had it happen with a child. So it's very straightforward. An attorney, and the child will do it in an attorney's office or at the DSS office, and it will be gone over with that child to make sure the child understands what they're signing. Because obviously, if you have a child, say a child with Down syndrome or something like that, we're going to have to seek exceptions. And I'll talk about some of the exceptions and the ways that you get exceptions here in a minute. Another form that you're going to have to fill out and you'll have to be involved in this part, is the affidavit disclosure of fees and expenses. And this is one of the more confusing documents when you're getting a foster care adoption, because the department is actually technically paying the fees, but they really come through you. So we typically have to, I and most of the attorneys I know try to file everything at once. We take the whole packet of paperwork and take it to the clerk. The clerk goes through all the documents that we have, make sure that we have everything. So I even include this. Some attorneys will wait and file this at the very end. I typically have this at the very beginning. So a typical description of fees is going to be filing fees paid out, put that as the Swain County Clerk of Superior Court. Type in their address, and that's going to be, what is it, 130? I don't think that's right. I think it's actually a different number. And then I'm going to put in attorney fees. Now, I don't know, again, I think a lot of DSSs do this a little, they do it differently. I know in my district, every time I've been hired by families in foster care to do these, we agree on a flat rate. There's been some I've had the filing fees themselves have worked two different ways. I've had the parents pay the filing fees out of their own pockets and get reimbursed by the DSS. And I have paid the filing fees up front and then paid those back in out of my DSS pay. Most attorneys are not going to do that, and I don't do that anymore. I did that back when I first started and was trying to figure out how this works. So most of the time, your attorneys are going to have an agreement with the Department of Social Services for a flat rate fee. That's how I operate. That's how the attorneys in this district operate. We have an agreement with the Department of Social Services for a flat rate fee. Any fees beyond that, the foster parents have to work with DSS to get, or are going to have to come up with out of their own pockets. So for the most part, that's just going to be that filing fee. There's always exceptions to the rule. The one place I think that I've had the biggest problem, well, it's not been a big problem yet, but the one place I could see being a problem is if you have an unknown parent and you have to publish on that unknown parent. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute, because unknown parents can be very, very tricky. There are some other documents that are going to go into the file when you file it. So, and I mention all this because, again, if you end up doing this outside of DSS and DSS isn't putting together your packets, you're going to have to do the legwork and come up with these documents. For the most part, you're going to be able to get them from the court system yourself. If you have been given a guardianship or if you've been given custody, you should be able to get those, or your attorney should be able to get those documents. But documents you're going to have is going to be the birth certificate, any custody or guardianship orders that you have coming from the court. Another document is the affidavit as to status of minor child. That's a more general, it's not an adoption specific document. That's a document that's a general document anytime you file a juvenile action, anytime you file a custody or anything involving juveniles. And then just any consents or relinquishments that have been done, any termination of parental rights orders that have been done, and then just any other relevant paperwork. So that's kind of, there's a big pile. One of the, well, I'm going to go back here. And then typically your attorney is going to file all of that paperwork together, and we're going to go ahead and fill out this decree of adoption for the clerk of court as well. And so this is going to have a lot of the information that was in the petition, and the clerk is going to simply sign off or not sign off. They can refuse an adoption. I've not had it happen, but it can happen. I've heard of it happening. So this is going to be the decree. The decree is not actually the end of the adoption, but it is a huge step toward the end of it. And then what the other big document that is going to have to be filled out is this report to vital records. And you are going to have to be actively involved in this one because you're going to have the information for this. So this is going to have, because this is where they get your information for a birth certificate. Because when you adopt this child, you now have a birth certificate that has you as this child's parents. So as you can see, it asks for the prior parents, but you're getting into your own date of birth, your place of birth, your relationship to the child, whether you're a single parent, your gender, your sex, your race, your ethnicity, your address, all of that. And all of that is for the vital records to get the order done. So that's the big part of this. There are a couple other documents that if you're doing, again, this is why it's typically helpful for you to be doing DSS. For foster care is a lot easier than private adoptions. Except once you get to this stage, I don't want to say that. Foster care at this stage is easier than private adoptions. Foster care in general is not easier than anything. Foster care in general is one of the hardest things I've ever seen people do. I've personally watched my sister go through it. I've seen, I do encounter the foster parents in my court system. So I know it is one of the hardest things for people to do. And you guys amaze me in your ability to work with these kids, especially those of you who want to adopt, because a lot of these are problem kids who need a lot more love and a lot more patience. But going back to the paperwork, some of the forms that you'll have to come up with if you're doing a private adoption, or you're going to have to file an affidavit explaining why you don't have these forms, are some medical forms and non-identifying information, background information form. If you're a foster parent adopting, typically, again, these are forms that DSS is going to fill out. These are forms for the parents to do. That's it's stuff so that you have some record that the kids can go back to at some point, hopefully, and find, okay, mom had these issues, bio mom had these issues, bio dad had these issues. And if they want a little more information, it gives them a little bit of room to kind of say, oh, he was interested in rock climbing. He was interested in, hopefully not in what most parents are interested in DSS, but, things like that. So the way this is typically going to go is DSS and your attorney, or you and your attorney, are going to get this huge packet of information together. They're going to take it, they're going to file it, 3 original copies with the clerk of court, and they're going to leave it there. The clerk is not actually supposed to sign off on anything first off, they have to do a report. They have to get a report from DSS or somebody else. I don't think I pulled that one up. They have to get a report from DSS or somebody else allowing them to, saying that your home is suitable for adoption. In the case of foster placements, your local Department of Social Services is going to do that. They're going to come out, they're going to run the background checks, they're going to do the home study, and then they have a form that they fill out that is a report to the court on the home residence for the proposed adoption. It's probably very similar to what you've already gone through to have the child placed in your home, regardless, whether that's a kinship placement, an unlicensed kinship placement, or a license, or what you've gone through for licensed foster care. I've not actually done that end of it, but I know that the report to the court has to be done. In a private case, the report to the court gets a little trickier. Where I live in rural North Carolina. I live in Swain County, North Carolina. This is the furthest district furthest region to the west. We are an hour further west than Asheville. The report to the court can be done by Department of Social Services, or it can be done by a private agency. When you are doing a private adoption and you live somewhere like Swain County, North Carolina, you have to wheedle your way into getting a Department of Social Services to do your private adoption report to the court. Sometimes they do them. Most of them have now started charging to do them, but it can be very difficult in rural areas to find somebody to do a report to the court. Now, I believe if you live somewhere, say Guilford County or Wake County, you may have a lot more options, but you're probably also looking at the pricier option of having where your Department of Social Services is going to tell you, we're not doing that. We don't have time. Here are agencies that do it. And you're going to have to go pay a private agency to come do the home study and the report to the court.
Can I add to that?
Yes, please do.
Something else that you may hear thrown out there, guys, is something called a PPA, or pre-placement assessment. And that's kind of the social work jargon that social workers use a lot of the time. And it is very similar to the amount of information that they gather at the beginning of the foster licensing process. I know all of you know you have your licensing workers. You're probably really friendly with them. At least I hope you are. And so they generally know you a whole lot better than even you know your family a lot of the times. And so that PPA is basically, and that report to the court, it's to show the clerk of court that you're suitable for adoption without them ever having to meet you. And so that's the goal of that paperwork. I hope that was helpful, Kristy.
Yeah, and actually I did pull up, I think I pulled up a copy of what it looks like. So let me do another share screen and I'll show you what a blank report to the court actually looks like. Let me put up here. Yeah. If it will, okay. So here's actually, they have a form report. It may not always look exactly like this, but they do have the form report. As you can see here, they're going to go through and get the history, your placement data, the type of adoption, child previously in agency, custody, and eligible for assistance, child placed from within state and another state. So they're going to go through all of this, and it is a 16-page document that I have not personally gone through, but it's again, Joe has a copy of this, so he can send it out and you can have a look so you have an idea of what kinds of questions are going to be asked for that form. So let me come back here and close that. So for certain things, for some of this information, and this is again, you really have to have an attorney for an adoption. I'm just going to put that out there. There's no getting around having an attorney for adoption. There's too much paperwork. There are too many little boxes to check. You pretty much have to have, and just trying to get it in front of who it needs to go in front of. You're gonna have to have an attorney do it. Happily, coming out of foster care, you should have those resources ready for you to do. Because so there are a couple of things that you can get waivers for. So as I said before, there are things like there's a medical paperwork about the parents, and there is the non-identifying information about parents. If you are doing even a DSS adoption, if they've had to terminate the parents' parental rights, or you're doing but more often in a private adoption, and you've had to terminate parents' rights and you can't find these people, which quite frequently happens. You can't find them, can't get them served, whatever. Or even you've served them and they're just not going to cooperate with you because they're so mad that you've terminated their parental rights. You're still expected to try and submit those documents. Well, you can't do that because those are their documents to fill out. So I've got an affidavit that an attorney will draft for the missing information that says, basically, I had to terminate this person's parental rights. This person opposed my termination of parental rights. This person will not talk to us. This person refuses to do this paperwork. Or we had to publish on this person. Have no idea where this person is. They won't do this paperwork. So that serves to get us a waiver on that paperwork. Another place where it's really helpful with the attorney is from the day the paperwork gets filed, the clerk of court is supposed to wait 90 days before they sign the decree, as I said earlier. Well, sometimes that's a lot longer than any of us want to wait anyway. But sometimes there are reasons we can't wait. I've had parents who wanted to get the name changed before the child started school. We're getting the adoption, everything filed in, say, the middle of June. And we don't expect anybody, everything's been done. We just need them to sign off on the paperwork. Well, the kids start school in August and they want to start school with their last name. That's actually good grounds for a motion to waive the 90 days. I've waived the 90 days primarily for that. I'm trying to think what other reasons I've used. I have used other reasons, but you can do a motion. Your attorney would draft the motion. Your attorney would draft the order. And then they would submit that also with their paperwork or after they do the initial batch of paperwork. And then the clerk can do a waiver of the 90 days. There are some other little tricky things that happen in court. So one of the things is the Indian Child Welfare Act. This is actually a bigger deal in my district than anywhere else in the state. However, with the big push that has been going on, but the higher likelihood that now exists that the Lumbee are going to become a federally recognized tribe, those of you who are living in areas where the Lumbee are, Indian Child Welfare Act is going to come into play. And the Indian Child Welfare Act, if you are in a case, if you're in a foster care case, the Indian Child Welfare Act has been a part of your case, hopefully since the beginning of the case. It doesn't go away. And so if you are adopting a Native American child, the tribe still, even at the point of adoption, so the tribe hopefully, and I know with the Eastern Band of Cherokee, who I mostly deal with, they're bound, their reservation lands, Saddle, Swain County, and Jackson County. So I've dealt with the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians my entire life. In fact, my two nieces that we adopted are both Native American. They're both enrolled members of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. So if you have a Native American case, you're adopting a Native American child, then it requires some additional paperwork. And those of you who do not live in this district may have to educate your attorney on that. Unfortunately, this comes up. I am one of the state experts, I dare say. I'm one of the state experts on the Indian Child Welfare Act because I've dealt with it so much. And I frequently get calls from the other Department of Social Services attorneys across the state, or even private attorneys who have come across my name dealing with their DSS or something because of the Indian Child Welfare Act. So the requirements of the Indian Child Welfare Act are not that horrific for an adoption, but they have to be followed every step. The tribe has to be notified of this adoption, and the tribe has that option to come in and still, they could disrupt that adoption. If they find a family member that wants placement, they could disrupt that adoption for that. Which, if you've dealt with that throughout the case, you're already familiar with the fact that the tribe could come in at any point in time and disrupt your placement. I love the tribe. I know the tribal attorney for the Eastern Band very, very well. I know the social workers very well. It is the last thing that they actually want to do. I will say their hands are just as tied by the Indian Child Welfare Act as everybody else's. So if they have a family member that they can't rule out, because I've had a case, not long back where we wanted to go to termination of parental rights and adoption. And a family member stood up at the last minute and said, no, I want this child. We couldn't rule them out. The tribe did everything they could to try and rule them out because we all thought the child was better off with the foster parents. But even the tribe finds their hands tied at times by ICWA. They couldn't rule them out, so they had to advocate for placement with that grandparent. And we had to move that child with that grandparent. I am happily getting ready to close that case out soon, but not in the way we had hoped a year ago. So Indian Child Welfare Act, the tribe gets notice, and typically they will provide some kind of documentation to the clerk of court that says, hey, we know this is going on, we approve of it. It can be here, it can be as informal as an email. I've printed off emails from Angie Lewis, that's the tribe's attorney, that just, informal email says, hey, we're the tribe, we approve of this adoption. We've been involved, this is what we want. So, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to scare you with ICWA. ICWA is very scary. ICWA is a whole other class unto itself, probably 2 or 3 at this point. But ICWA comes in. The Multi-Ethnic Placement Act can come in. I don't know as much about it. I've not had to deal with it as much, but there is the Howard Metzenbaum Multi-Ethnic Placement Act that can also come in. It does not have the scary ramifications of ICWA, and it should have been addressed, I believe, in the underlying case if there were any concerns before you get to an adoption.
Can I add to that real quick?
Yeah.
Just in case y'all don't know, if y'all don't know what Multi-Ethnic Placement Act is, it basically came about because particularly minorities and children in a minority were languishing in care for no reason. And what this law established is, and later an amendment, if I'm not mistaken, Christy, was that 1, you cannot discriminate on adoptions based on the race, RCNO, race, color, nation of origin of the child. And then later on, an amendment stated that you cannot stop an adoption or keep somebody from adopting someone based on RCNO as well. And RCNO stands for race, color, and national origin.
Okay. So there you go. So ultimately, ICWA and that are 2 other things that can come up. So a couple of other notes. North Carolina only has closed adoptions. We have no open adoptions. Anything that is an open adoption, because everybody asks about them, especially foster care. The parents, it would make all of our lives a lot easier in some ways if we did have open adoptions, because a lot of times parents would be a lot more likely to relinquish or to consent to an adoption if they knew that we had an open adoption. North Carolina doesn't have that. You can do some voluntary agreements, nothing that is enforceable by law. You can voluntarily allow somebody to kind of stay involved in their child's life. My sister does that with, she's actually doing that with the parents of both of the girls that she adopted. And of course, because John was a family member adoption, his father his bio father was allowed to have contact throughout John's life. But that's, ultimately, that's going to be your decision. So like I said, it's a blessing. It's a blessing in many ways because it is your decision. And I know coming out of foster care, most of the time, especially when you have very small children, when you have older children, you almost have no choice but for it to be kind of an open adoption situation. They know their parents. They know who they were. And as you all know, children always want that love from their bio parents. So they're always going to have some kind of an attachment. It's one of the hardest parts of your jobs as foster parents, is dealing with having that child that is so desperate for that love and affection that they're angry. We know that they're angry, and they lash out at you when you've done nothing wrong, because they can't lash out at that other person, because they know that they are going to turn away, that they'll walk away. They already have. So that's one of the issues I have come up with. Older children, you pretty much are kind of stuck with almost an unofficial open adoption situation. But with younger children, one of the blessings is you're not. And even if you do agree to something, even if you agree to something at the outset and say, okay, no, we'll work with you. If they screw up and they're not good for your child, you don't have to do that. They can't take you into court and say, well, he agreed that I can always have visitation. That's not the way adoption in North Carolina works. So that is one of the benefits of the closed adoption system. I said earlier, the clerk can deny an adoption, or it happens rarely, but it does happen. And if it does, you have the option of taking it before a judge. I know of I can think of two examples where I know things were taken in front of a judge. One was actually, and neither of them was because a clerk denied the adoption. One was an instance where two families wanted to adopt the same child, and they both filed their adoption paperwork at the same time. So that went before a judge for the judge to determine who got to adopt that child. And I believe, if I recall correctly, that was a case of family A had the sibling of the child, but didn't have placement of the newer child. And family B was the foster family who had placement of the child. So family A wanted the other kid so that they would have the siblings together. Family B wanted to keep the kid that they had. And the court in that case ruled for family B. The foster family got to keep the child that they had. I took one in front of a judge because the vital records sent it back. And that's the last thing I will talk about is vital records, because they're kind of a nightmare. Vital records sent it back. And it was over the report on the proposed adoption. The Department of Social Services, who did the home study and did the report on the proposed adoption, didn't use the form. They used something else. And Vital Records said, that's not the report on the proposed adoption. It had all of the information, every last bit of information, but they called it a home study and they didn't use the form, and Vital Records booted it back. And I'd had some complications where I couldn't get a new one done because the family had moved in the intervening months while we waited for Vital Records to finalize this. So I took it in front of a judge. I just noticed it in front of a judge, and the judge said, well, this covers everything. This qualifies. I'm ordering this adoption to go through. So Vital Records is the last part of this. Everything, once the clerk has signed it, everything goes to Vital Records with that adoption form. Vital Records is a nightmare. I hope nobody from Vital Records is on this. I love you guys. I know you got a hard job to do, but it seems like there are several people who work in that office, and none of them know what the other is doing at any given point in time. I've had this happen with multiple cases. So all I'm gonna tell you on Vital Records is be patient. It's gonna take them a long time to get your new birth certificate. They will get it, hopefully. It's gonna take them a long time if they decide for whatever reason to send the paperwork back. I've only had that one incident where the paperwork got sent back, but I've known other attorneys who almost every time they do one, it gets sent back for something, and it'll be something minuscule. I've had people, the expedited fee is probably not going to be worth it. Just telling you up front. Expedited fee, probably not going to be worth it. My sister paid that for one of hers, and there was nothing expedited about getting that birth certificate. So you may have to call, and it may finally take, I know I did an adult adoption, and I ended up having to call them myself. And the reason I say nobody in that office seems to know what anybody else in that office is doing is because the person I called told me something completely different than the person that my client had called, who had told them something completely different than what they had told the young woman being adopted. So, but after I called, we were able to get everything resolved. So again, if you run into those issues with vital records where they're telling you 5 or 6 different things and you can't figure out where your birth certificate is and what has happened to the money that you sent them, go ahead and go to DSS, who's going to get just as frustrated as anybody else, but go to DSS, go to your attorney and have them call, and you might get some, might get some results that way. So I think the only other thing I had in my notes to mention was the issue of the unknown parent. Now, most of the time, your unknown parent is going to be gotten rid of at TPR. They should terminate, you should terminate your unknown parent's rights. But let's say everybody that, let's say you have a mom and she's doing a consent to adopt. You might not want to do a TPR. You might want to just file the adoption paperwork. If you do, you are still going to have to publish against an unknown parent. So I'm just throwing that out there because one way or the other, you're either going to have to terminate that unknown parent and publish against them, or you're going to have to wrap it up in the adoption and publish against them. I recently did one where I did not terminate against an unknown parent. I published on them, and you're going to have to provide that as part of your adoption paperwork. So that's the other thing. I think that's kind of a very, very quick, I know that's a lot, that's a huge info dump. That was a lot of information.
It was really good information, Kristy.
But
in fact, we have some, we want to have 10 minutes for questions, and we have one question already from April, which asks, have you ever had a nonverbal special needs child over the age of 12 be adopted, and how do they give adoption consent?
I have not, but I will tell you how I would handle that if I did. The way I would handle that is I would file a motion for a waiver of that consent. My motion, it would just be a motion very much like the other motions, any motions I have involving the non-cooperative parents. And I would simply state juvenile is nonverbal, juvenile does not have the IQ, juvenile cannot consent. Juvenile does not have the capacity to consent to this. And I would do that as a motion, and I would present that motion in that order. And I would hope that that would cover it. Most of the time when I've had to do any kind of a motion and order, I've had no problems with vital records or the clerks of court in doing that. They'll grant that order and say, this child does not have to do a consent. The only other thing that I might look into, since you guys are foster care, is you might get an affidavit from the guardian ad litem as well in a case like that, because the guardian ad litem has already spoken for that child in the underlying foster care case. And that might be something that the court might want going forward in an adoption, is say, if your child, if I would try the motion, if the motion didn't work, I would probably ask for the court to appoint a guardian ad litem, so that that guardian ad litem is then representing your over 12-year-old's needs and can say, no, this is what needs to happen.
The other thing is too, Kristy, if you have a child in that situation, they probably have records from the schools that would verify that, and a guardian ad litem would have access to that. You probably, as foster parents, have access to that as well. So that's documentation as well. Are there other questions?
There was one earlier from April in the chat pod. She asked surrounding the consent for adoption age 12 and up. If a child is deemed incompetent to be able to sign said document.
Already got it. Already got it.
Oh, did we already have it?
Yeah, we already answered it.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, I tuned out for a second. See, now I look stupid.
So guys, one of the best pieces of advice that we got when it came to birth certificates coming from Raleigh is when you get them, when you finally do adopt, get 3 or 4 copies when you do it, because when you need to go back and get another copy, you can't go down to your normal county area to get these adoptions, because it's a closed adoption. You can only get them from Raleigh if you adopt in foster care, and it takes months for those copies to get to you. So, you and I can just order one from wherever and it'll be shipped, within a couple of days, or you can run downtown and get one. Not in the case of our babies. You have to order them from Raleigh, and it takes a long time to get them in. Kelly French has one last question we'll take, and then I've got some housekeeping duties. What if parents' rights are terminated and the child is adopted, and 10 years later, or 2 years later, or 1 year later, the parents want their child back, which is not uncommon. I mean, unfortunately, I've had one of mine, a situation popped up.
Well, for the most part, the parent in that situation, if everything was handled properly, unless there is something that was mishandled with the termination of parental rights or the adoption paperwork, unless there was something that was mishandled, that parent is absolutely out of luck. Now, there may be some Native American exceptions. And I don't really want to get too much into that. I've not had to deal with one of those. But again, Indian Child Welfare Act kind of gives some added levels of protection. So I want to say, because I think that's actually the baby, what they call her. I can't think of the name of it. But there was a case out of South Carolina about almost 10 or so years back. And that baby, I think the father appealed that adoption a year. I want to say it might be like a 2-year window that they have to come in and appeal an adoption on ICWA grounds. But he could only appeal it on that very specific ground. He was not able to appeal it. He was not able to get it set aside on any other ground. His appeal was based completely on the Indian Child Welfare Act and saying that it wasn't followed. So it goes back to, if everything was done correctly, if everything was followed correctly, then they're probably well out of luck.
And I want to add more. Tracy had one more question from the chat pod. I asked her to, I'll ask you to get on your mic in just a second. I just want to add one more thing about birth certificates. Like Gail said, they're very difficult to get post-adoption and they take a lot of time. So my daughter's adoption was finalized March of this year. And when I was a line worker, when I was a social worker, I always told adoptive parents, request 4 certified copies when you get it, because if you ever need one and you don't have extras, it takes about 4 to 6 months to get them. And Tracy, what was your question last one? Maybe the last one?
Okay, sorry, it took me a minute to unmute. I just didn't want to take the time to type it. The child that I may hopefully get to adopt, his father has not been named by the mother, and nor do we expect him to be named. So if we have the opportunity to adopt him, how will that work if the father is not named at all? He's not on the birth certificate.
So if that's the case, then if the department's having to do it by termination of parental rights, then they should also terminate against an unknown parent. You actually include that as you include unknown parent as a party, and service on that person would be accomplished by publication. You publish wherever, and I've had to do this. I did it several years back in a private case. I published in the county where the child was born and just said, if you, and it was something about basically if you were involved with, and I'm trying not to be explicit. I think the publication notice was actually a little more explicit than I'm being, but if you were involved with this woman around these dates and you might have had a baby, you better call.
I'd like to share an example of that too. When I was a line worker, we published on an unknown father and we were successful, and it was basically the same thing, except the mom actually only knew his street name, and his street name was like Tubby Thug. And somebody that knew him as Tubby Thug notified him, and then he notified the department like, hey, I think I'm the baby daddy. You know, can I get involved? So but that's why we have to publish, because we may be successful and we have to do all diligent efforts to locate.
I was trying to see here what exactly my publication notice said. I'm not seeing it right offhand, but it's a little bit different from the other publication notices. But yeah, basically you're saying if you might have been the father of this baby born to this woman on this date, please, and you would like to have any say in this, you need to contact us right now. And I have run it both in termination of parental rights and terminated against the unknown father. And then I've also done the same thing in an adoption, because we had everybody consenting to, everybody else was consenting. So instead of doing a separate termination action, we did we just did the adoption and we published in the adoption.
Okay, thank you so much for your questions, everybody. Gail, you wanted to wrap up with some things?
Yep, I just posted 3 different things in the chat box, and if you guys can, if you need certificate for training tonight, you have the evaluation. At the end of the evaluation, you'll be able to click on there that you want a certificate, and then I will, after about 2 days, I will sit down. And Gabby, the answer to that is absolutely. If you're adopted through DSS, yes. So if you will go through the certificate, go through the evaluation, you'll get a certificate for training. I'll send it to you via email that you registered with. Our next webinar is scheduled for December the 3rd. It's for so Angela Quijada Banks will be with us. She is a former foster youth who came up through North Carolina's system, and she has now living out in the West Coast, and she has written a book. It's the Black Foster Youth Handbook, and she's going to join us. It'll be an hour and a half because we've also invited Say So, which is the organization that speaks directly to helping youth in foster care and supporting them. We're super stoked about the next webinar because it's going to be exactly in the direction we're really trying to work with, getting these older teens. And I know probably half of you are cringing with the idea of thinking about working with the youth. Right? I see about half of you shaking your heads right now. The teens are the hardest. However, right now, guys, the teens are the neediest right now in the middle of COVID. We have teens. I just talked to a foster care line worker today where there was a teen who stayed 9 days in a DSS office because there was no one to take them. And it was the sweetest girl, but there was just nowhere to put her. There was no home that would take her. And this is no fault of her own. 9 days staying in the DSS office. And I started questioning her, you know, what do you need? And she said, Gail, we don't even need long-term placements. Right now, I just need short-term placements until I can get them to the next stop. And she said, if I can get foster families just to step up even for short times, you know, 2-week stints, 3-week stints, until we can get them to the next stop. Or the permanent, the permanency spots that we're looking at. So I thought that was pretty telling just to hear that. But if you're like me, that's a little bit out of my comfort zone, but I'm willing to listen. I'm willing to learn, willing to consider.
Can I say just real quick? So my sister, you know, I have personal experience. I do not have kids. I was never meant to be a mother. I am an aunt. I was a born aunt. I'm the one that's intended to spoil the heck out of the kid and send the child back to your home full of sugar and sass. That's my job. But my sister, actually, she got the first of the 2 girls she adopted at the age of 11. The second one, the one that she just adopted this year, she got at the age of 16. She now has that girl's 13-year-old little brother, and they are the greatest blessing. They are hard. The 16-year-old has had some issues. She had to be involuntarily committed not too long ago. They are hard, but they are so worth it. They just, when you meet one of these teenagers and you have the opportunity to spend time with them, they will break your heart, but they're well worth it.
Yep, agreed. So, and then the last thing I want to tell you guys about is the Foster Parent Bill of Rights that we're working on. And I saw Kirsten Hall on, and there's a couple other people that are on that committee. And so right now we have a Bill of Rights survey, and in conjunction with Benchmarks, which is another nonprofit around, they are listening to us, and we have every idea that after the first of the year, we're going to present from the survey what you guys want collectively to be included in, and hopefully get some legislation out of this. So please, please, please fill this out. Don't freak out that you've got to write these down right now. If you will fill out the survey from tonight, it will be at the bottom at the response after you fill out the survey. So all three of those things that we just did. So all you have to worry about clicking on is the evaluation, and I'll post it again here at the end. So you can just click on that to get to the next stop. And then once you fill this out, all that information will be in there. And I'll make sure that it's in the next email that goes out, and your invite tonight had it in there too. So we appreciate you guys coming tonight. We had right at 70 people join us, which is huge. And each time we meet, we're getting bigger and bigger, and we appreciate everything you're doing for the children across North Carolina.
And if you want to be involved with our group, please go to our website and file an application. Or just even if you want to be part of one of our committees, you're more than welcome. Please come on board with us. We have a lot of fun together, and we are doing some really good work. So thank you again, Kristy. We appreciate you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank all you guys. Thank you very much. Foster parents keep us going. Foster parents are some of the most wonderful people that I've ever known, and I appreciate everything you guys do. And I'll tell you, we don't say it enough, but the DSS attorneys really do appreciate you. You guys are wonderful. So thank you very much for everything you do.
Okay,
Thank you, everyone.
do the Zoom wave. The
Bye.
Zoom, everybody. Take care. Have a good weekend. Kristy, you're awesome.
Thank you.
So well, that just went so well.
If anybody has any follow-up questions or anything, just direct them to me. I'll get you answers as I can. And I know, like I said, Indian Child Welfare Act is where it gets scary.
Yeah.
Yeah, that could be a whole nother webinar.
Yeah, exactly. Which I think interesting, Kristy. I had a child that I was working with that there was a DSS complaint called in, and they got involved. And I mean, they were going to pull them. Even after the adoption, and the parents were like, "But they're adopted." And I'm like,
no. And different tribes interact differently. I've had tribes refuse to be involved at all. They just, some of the poorer tribes, if you get kids from some of the poorer tribes out west.
And Alaska. I've had Alaska refuse to get involved.
Isn't that interesting?
They don't have the funding. They can't do it.
Eskimo.
Yeah. Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, they get involved.
Oh, absolutely. And they should. They should.
I suspect if the Lumbee get the federal recognition that they've been promised, I suspect that they'll also be very, very involved.
Very much, yeah. Thanks so much, though, Kristy.
Thank you, Kristy.
We really should do one on a tribal.
I think it would be interesting. And tell me the lead social worker there, Kristy.
Jenny Bean, is she still the lead liaison?
Yes. That's
Jenny,
who I've been,
and then you have Melody Turner also works with Jenny.
Well, Jenny's the one that called me about, they had a couple of kids with RAD, and she had called me to help settle down a parent. And she
I can probably name the kid.
It was a little girl. It was a little girl.
I think I know exactly which one, because I think she's one of, I think she's probably one of mine.
She's heading to adoption.
We had a speaker at the collaborative. I guess it was the last time we met, who was from the Office of Indian Affairs. So he was a really good speaker. I think his name was George. Okay, terrible.
Yeah.
I don't actually have to deal with BIA a lot because again, most of my tribal stuff, I've got one case involving the Go Shoot though, and I've got one case involving Cherokee Nation right now.
Wow.
Cherokee Nation tends to be our next most common one because people from Oklahoma will sometimes move to North Carolina and
Mhm.
Right.
dealing with that. But Go Shoot, we've had we've had a Sioux, Red Rock Sioux.
Mhm.
Wow.
That was one of the ones we couldn't get tribal involvement.
Yep.
So
Hey, Gabby, you good? You guys good? You good? You're on mute. I just want to check in with you.
I'm gonna check out. You guys know
Thank you, Christy.
have a good night.
I gotta go too, ladies.
you
Thank
are.
you, Joanne and Gail.
Okay,
Thank you.
Joe. thanks a
Yeah,
lot.
I'm good. Thank
You're
you.
good. What county are you licensed in, Gabby?
Thank you. Sampson County.
Okay. All right. I just want to. You and I had emailed several times. I was just gonna check in with you.
Yes, in Sampson County.
Who are you licensed through?
Thompson.
DSS.
Thompson.
Okay.
No, it's a private agency.
Which one?
It's Thompson.
Oh, Thompson's. You're with Thompson's. That's who I'm with.
Yes, Thompson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Who?
Yeah.
Let me turn the recording off.